What people do in the Jewish world is often based on agreements they make or have made with themselves, with others, with their versions of Judaism, with God, with the greater world, and with life itself. In these agreements, we tell ourselves who we are, how to behave, why things are the way they are, what is possible, and what is not. Some of these agreements may not be troublemakers, but there are a significant number of problematic agreements which originate from fear, selfishness or self-absorption, ego, incompetencies, jealousy, close-mindedness, ignorance or insecurity, all of which harm the Jewish world. And yet we hold on to these agreements, partly because we aren't aware of how arbitrary and limiting they are, partly because we haven't taken the time or energy to identify alternatives, mostly because they make us feel safe. And safety, even if it brings a lack of desired actions or results, feels better than throwing ourselves into the proverbial unknown. Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, in his work Alei Shor, cites a midrash, a Talmudic interpretation, in which each person at Mount Sinai experienced revelation according to their ability. He connects this to an idea from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto that there are 600,000 explanations of the Torah, and each person received an interpretation according to the root of their soul. This is where the delicate balance between Jewish individualism and collectivism comes into play. Each of us is one of these 600,000 explanations, no explanation greater or lesser than the others, just different. As such, this requires an imperative humility to acknowledge that each of us contains only a partial truth, and that predominantly running in circles with others who share our like-minded partial truths only makes our partial truths more partial. To be a thriving Jewish people, and to more effectively connect ourselves and our Judaism with our non-Jewish family, friends, and communities, we need all 600,000 explanations to hold the Torah in its entirety. Rabbi Yonah, an 11th century Talmudist and ethicist, explained that to love peace is to subscribe to the concept of peace, aspiring to it as an ideal. To pursue peace, though, is to practically and persistently do something about it. We pursue peace. We actively create and cement the conditions for it, through concerted, measured actions. The idea is that peace is essentially a verb, as opposed to a noun. The same can be said about the 4 Jewish agreements you are about to encounter. Agreeing to them, paying lip service to them, is akin to loving peace. But Judaism, the Jewish people, and our great Jewish homeland and state developed and endured thanks to people who treated these blessings as verbs, as acts of collaborating, of sacrificing, of rejoicing. There is a Hasidic story about a cantor who was studying the prayers before the holidays. He came in a rush to the local rabbi and asked to be dismissed from additional duties. The rabbi asked why he was hurrying, and the cantor replied that he had to look at the Machzor, the prayer book designated for the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, to arrange his prayers in order. "The prayers are the same as last year," said the rabbi. "It would be better if you look into your own deeds and put yourself in order." This brings us to the 4 Jewish agreements. Number 1, be impeccable with your words. Number 2, don't take anything personally. Number 3, don't make assumptions. And number 4, always do your best. Now let's dive into each one. Number 1, be impeccable with your words. Impeccable in this case means free from fault or blame. That is, to speak about others as though they are free from fault or blame. Yet I find that many of us Jews are so quick to negatively or disparagingly speak about other Jews, which actually contributes to anti-Semitism, because anti-Semites adopt these sentiments and propagate them as well. The only people capable of threatening the future of the Jewish people are the Jewish people, wrote the late, great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Just because someone thinks, acts, or lives differently than us does not make them lesser or greater than us. Why, then, do we fault or blame others for not living according to our exact logos, pathos, and ethos? What is the definition of love? To take pleasure in another's virtues, wrote Rabbi Noah Weinberg, another one of our legendary sages of blessed memory. Every human being has virtues. To love means to excuse the faults and focus on virtues. Rabbi Shaul Rosenblatt attested that Rabbi Weinberg was a living testament to this definition of love, saying, He could have created students who were willing, following zombies. He certainly had the charisma to do so, but he wanted independent thinkers, people who had their own well-considered and honestly reasoned opinions. Even if those opinions were different than his, he wanted leaders, not followers. He wanted truth and nothing else mattered to him, added Rabbi Rosenblatt. If it wasn't truth, then he wanted to be wrong. And if he felt it was true, there was no one who jumped quicker, ran faster, or stayed the course longer. To help people become more impeccable with their words, Rabbi Weinberg came up with the 5 belts of intellectuality. Ironically, when it comes to the bigger issues in life, people often follow their emotions rather than their mind, even though feelings do have a tendency to cloud our perception of reality. So what do we do about it? In karate, different colored belts denote graduating levels of skill. In Judaism, there are also 5 belts, representing the 5 levels of intellectual refinement. The first of these 5 belts is determining definitions, objective definitions. The lack of a proper definition is not only foolish, it can also be dangerous, wrote Rabbi Weinberg. Plenty of people have sacrificed their lives for causes they felt were good. Even Hitler presumably had a goal of doing good, to rid the world of Jewish vermin. But somewhere, something went wrong. According to Rabbi Weinberg, Judaism has a concept called the I, you, they game. It is based on the premise that, when we refer to ourselves, we paint the best possible picture. When we disagree with someone, but we don't want to directly insult them, we paint them gray. And when we're talking about someone who isn't around to defend themselves, we paint them black. I am white. You are gray. They is black. This is because, at least in part, we apply different subjective definitions to ourselves and to others. By working through objective definitions, we can assess the situation on equal grounds and come to realize that we have much more in common than we might have originally thought. Number 2, don't take anything personally. In the age of identity politics, we tend to take everything so personally. Yet when I asked Rabbi David Wolpe, one of the preeminent rabbis of our day, about a piece of advice he would give his younger self, he said, "Don't take everything so personally." Easier said than done, of course. After all, we're living in the age of self-help, self-consciousness, self-awareness, self-actualization, self-esteem, self-development, the vaunted selfie. This is what makes Judaism so fragile today, because Judaism was never about the yous or me's of the day. It has always been about we, the Jewish people, past, present, and future. Certainly we must find our individual selves in Judaism, and I'm a big believer in do-it-yourself Jewishness. But no one individual or individual group of people defines Judaism, Jewishness, and the Jewish people. They have already been defined on a macro level for us. The challenge is, how do we mold ourselves, our lives, our goals and aspirations, our search for meaning and purpose, our communities and organizations to fit these definitions? And which of these definitions can we ambitiously bend, but not destructively break? We think of ourselves as fixed and the world as malleable, said famed entrepreneur and investor Naval Ravikant. But it's really we who are malleable and the world as fixed. Number 4, don't make assumptions. Are you aware that so much of what we tell ourselves are just assumptions? We humans have a phenomenally ferocious imagination, and there are endless ideas and stories we conjure up. We seem to listen to the voices in our heads more than we listen to our most trusted family and friends. And we start imagining what other people are doing, what they're thinking, what they're saying about us. Then we dream things up faster than a Koenigsegg Gemera can go from 0 to 60 miles per hour, less than 2 seconds, apparently. The problem isn't that we invent whole stories which are only true for us. The problem is that we believe them. One assumption leads to another. We jump to conclusions, and we take our stories so very seriously and so very personally. Then we blame other people, and we even start gossiping to help us justify our assumptions. By gossiping, a distorted concept becomes exponentially more distorted. Making assumptions and then taking them personally is the beginning of hell in this world. wrote Miguel Ruiz, an international best-selling author. Almost all of our conflicts are based on this, and it's easy to understand why. Assumptions are nothing more than lies that we are telling ourselves. This creates a big drama for nothing, because we don't really know if something is true or not. Now think about the assumptions we make in the Jewish world. Assumptions about other Jews, for example Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, religious and secular, liberal and conservative, partial Jews and full Jews, born Jews and converted Jews. Assumptions about Israel, assumptions about Israeli Jews, and assumptions about Jews in the diaspora. Assumptions about Zionism and Zionists. Assumptions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Assumptions about the Middle East. Assumptions about our lay leaders and clergy members. Assumptions about our institutions and organizations. Assumptions about our Jewish or Jewish children and grandchildren. When Jewish survivors of the Holocaust arrived in Israel, many of them were shamed by Jews already living in Israel during this atrocity. "Why didn't you fight back? And how could you let them do that to you?" the locals would say to them. True story. All these shaming Jews knew was what they read in the newspapers, heard on the radio, and perhaps some hearsay. Instead of asking survivors what really happened, they jumped to conclusions based on quite minimal information. And it's not like these survivors landed in Israel happy, joy, eager to pour out their unimaginable traumas to anyone who would lend an ear or two. Today, Holocaust survivors are universally celebrated in Israel, with initiatives to preserve their stories on videotape, as well as organizations dedicated to supporting the diminishing group of Holocaust survivors. So what exactly changed in Israel? Survivors started talking about their stories, and the rest started listening with a real intent to learn, to understand, to come together. Remember that one of the original premises of Jewish purpose on earth is to be God's partners in creation, in making the world a better place for all its inhabitants. Whether or not you subscribe to the God part is besides the point. Yet so many of us have become God's partners in prosecution, armchair judges who are so quick to condemn others' Judaism and Jewishness, as if our versions are somehow superior. We criticize based on face value and vanity, at the expense of channeling genuine curiosity to seek nuance, context, background, and depth. We have become so seduced by our own mildly informed opinions and intoxicating echo chambers that we become blinded to and uninterested in truth, or at least the pursuit of it. Sure, humans in general have this so-called need to explain and justify almost everything, and we make assumptions to fulfill our pressing desire to know, or at least feel like we know. We don't always care whether our assumptions are, in fact, true or not. True or false, we staunchly believe in what we believe, and we go on believing it, because the thought of being knowledgeable makes us feel safe. But if we would just ask more questions, with a real intent to learn, to understand, to come together, we could rather quickly fan the flames of this pressing desire that results in knee-jerk assumption-making. Dr. Warren Goldstein, the chief rabbi of South Africa, calls this making space for each other, which means transcending our ego, rising above ourselves, and developing the capacity to show understanding, forgiveness, and compassion to those around us. And lastly, number 4, always do your best. Rabbi Kalman Pakuz once asked Rabbi Noah Weinberg for his favorite joke. The latter laughed and then proceeded to say, "There was once a man who worked the late shift. When his shift was over, he would take a shortcut home through a graveyard. One dark, moonless night, he was following the path when he fell into an open grave. Unbeknownst to him, someone had dug it during the day. For an hour, he tried to find a foothold or handhold to get out of the grave. Finally, he gave up, sat in the corner, and decided to wait until someone came in the morning. A short while later, another man, taking the same shortcut, plops into the grave. From his seat in the corner, the first man watches as the second man searches for a foothold or handhold to get out, figuring he'll save the guy some time, and maybe they can get out if they work together. He gets up, walks up behind the second man. He then taps him on the shoulder from behind. Zip! Zap! The second man jumps straight out of the grave. After sitting there for a few seconds, pondering probably one of the unfunniest jokes I've ever heard, Rabbi Pakuz asked Rabbi Weinberg what could possibly be so funny about this joke. "Imagine what we could accomplish if we actually used our potential," Rabbi Weinberg said. Isn't that funny? It's kind of true, right? Although, as I'm talking about this section, I'm not sure I love the word best in always do your best. I think that shooting for better, incremental improvement, every day, or as often as possible, is a wiser, more sustainable play. Some people call this getting 1% better every day. The Jews' greatest contribution to history is dissatisfaction, the greater Israeli statesman Shimon Peres said. We're a nation born to be discontented. Whatever exists, we believe can be changed for the better. As they say, if you want to make our world better, make yourself better. People conquer the world by conquering themselves. I call this being a good Jewish ancestor, like the Talmudic tale of a man who was planting carob trees. A passerby asked him how long it takes to bear fruit. 70 years, the man replied, to which the passerby wondered aloud, Are you certain that you will live another 70 years? The man pondered the question and then said, I found carob trees in this world planted for me by my ancestors, so I am planting these for my descendants. Being a good Jewish ancestor also means honoring those Jews who came before us, who were not so lucky to live in a world with a strong, independent Jewish state, who needed to be under-the-radar Jews as a form of survival, or who drank too much of the assimilation Kool-Aid. Those Jews who were subjected to pogroms and frightening discrimination, whose opportunities were limited not by their experience and work ethic, but by their Judaism and Jewishness. That is Judaism's great contribution to humanity, wrote Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, to show that one can be other and still human, still a loyal and active citizen, still make contributions to every field of human endeavor, still be loved by God and held precious in His sight.